91,000 German soldiers laid down their arms at Stalingrad. They weren't captured in a single skirmish, but in the largest defeat the German army had ever suffered. And here's the chilling truth. Of those 91,000 men, only about 5,000 ever saw their homeland again. Imagine that. An army the size of a small city vanished almost completely. Survival was less a matter of strength than pure chance. The collapse at Stalingrad wasn't just military. It was human tragedy on a colossal scale. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover how these men were trapped, why surrender didn't guarantee survival, and the horrifying reality of life in Soviet captivity. Most shocking of all, you'll learn the unexpected reasons why some prisoners returned decades later, long after the war had ended. What happened to them wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a lesson in endurance, leadership, and the razor-thin line between life and death. So let me put this to you directly. If you were surrounded in a frozen city with no food, no medicine, and no chance of rescue, what would you do? Would you keep fighting until the last bullet, or would you surrender, gambling on the mercy of your captors? Drop your choice in the comments. There's no easy answer, and maybe that's the point. The men at Stalingrad faced it for real. You and I only face it in thought. Picture this, November 1942. The German 6th Army, over 250,000 strong, is stretched deep into Stalingrad. Suddenly, the Soviets unleash Operation Uranus. From the north and south, massive Soviet forces slam into the weaker Romanian and Italian divisions guarding the flanks. Within days, Paulus's men are surrounded in a tightening steel ring. No retreat, no escape routes, just a frozen city now turned into a cage. The trap wasn't luck. It was calculated brilliance. The lesson? Never ignore your flanks. A strong center means nothing if the edges collapse. Even the most powerful army can be strangled by encirclement. Here's the twist. Paulus and his generals knew they were trapped. They begged for permission to break out while there was still time. But Hitler's response? The 6th Army will stand fast. No retreat, no breakout, only hold the ground at all costs. It was a death sentence disguised as loyalty. Supplies had to be airdropped, but the Luftwaffe couldn't meet even a fraction of the need. Soldiers froze, starved, and waited for salvation that never came. Blind obedience can be more dangerous than the enemy, and at Stalingrad, obedience killed more than bullets ever could. What does it mean to starve in minus 30 degrees? For the 6th Army, it meant gnawing on frozen horse meat, boiling wallpaper paste for calories, and watching comrades collapse from exhaustion. Frostbite, blackened fingers and toes, until amputation was the only option, without anesthesia. Imagine trying to fight while your boots are literally frozen to your feet. Hunger kills slowly. Cold kills silently. Together, they drain the will to resist. The takeaway? No army is stronger than its supply line. Logistics aren't just numbers. They're the difference between survival and extinction. By late January 1943, the end was inevitable. General Friedrich Paulus, newly promoted to Field Marshal, faced an impossible choice. Hitler had expected him to fight to the death. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. Yet Paulus did the unthinkable. He laid down arms. For the men, it wasn't relief, but uncertainty. Surrender didn't promise life, it merely postponed death. Still, capitulation spared Stalingrad from becoming a graveyard of absolute annihilation. Sometimes, surrender isn't cowardice. It's the only rational act left. Leaders must know when to fight and when to preserve lives. When the guns finally fell silent, around 91,000 German soldiers laid down their weapons. It was the largest mass surrender in Europe since the Napoleonic Wars. The column stretched for miles. Starved men, frostbitten, some barely able to stand. Civilians and Red Army soldiers lined the roads, staring at what had once been Hitler's pride. Many prisoners still clung to hope. Maybe captivity means survival. But hope was fragile. They didn't yet know the march east would claim thousands more lives. Lesson? Numbers don't guarantee safety. Even in surrender, survival is never promised. Captivity was no rescue. It was another battlefield. Disease spread unchecked: typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Hunger stalked the barracks, just as in Stalingrad. Daily rations, sometimes less than 600 calories. Men traded boots for bread, coats for soup. For many, life became a cruel coin toss. Some survived on sheer resilience. Others collapsed within weeks. Soviet guards weren't uniformly brutal, but conditions were unforgiving. POW camps turned soldiers into shadows of men. The stark takeaway? Survival wasn't about rank or valor. It was about luck, endurance, and timing. War doesn't end when the gunfire stops. For many, captivity began with a march that was itself a death sentence. Exhausted men were forced to trek hundreds of kilometers in freezing snow, often without food, water, or proper clothing. Those who stumbled were beaten, shot, or simply left to freeze. Eyewitnesses recalled roads littered with corpses, frozen mid-stride like statues of despair. The march became a filter. Only the strongest or luckiest reached the camps. War doesn't always kill in battle. It kills in silence, step by step. The lesson? When leaders gamble, it's the ordinary soldier who pays the price. Reaching the camps didn't mean safety. The Gulag system was notorious even for Soviet citizens. Now, thousands of enemy soldiers were thrown into its grip. Endless labor in mines, forests, and factories broke bodies already starved. Some prisoners kept diaries, writing of days so cold the ink froze before it touched paper. Death came not with drama, but with quiet inevitability. Yet even here, small communities formed. Men shared scraps, whispered songs, clung to memory. Humanity flickered in the bleakest of places. The truth? Systems may strip dignity, but solidarity can keep it alive. Captivity wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Soviet authorities saw opportunity in the broken remnants of the Sixth Army. They organized lectures, distributed leaflets, and even created German-language radio broadcasts. Some prisoners were persuaded to join the National Committee for a Free Germany, a propaganda tool aimed at undermining Hitler. For starving soldiers, cooperation sometimes meant an extra bowl of soup, or just survival. Others resisted, clinging to loyalty even as their strength faded. The battlefield had shifted from rifles to ideas. Takeaway? In war, the mind can be a weapon, sharper than steel. Here's the harsh reality. Of the 91,000 men who surrendered, roughly 80,000 died in Soviet captivity. Hunger, disease, exhaustion, and brutal winters claimed most lives within the first year. Others vanished into labor camps scattered across the vast Soviet Union. By the early 1950s, only about 5,000 survivors trickled back to Germany. That's a survival rate of just 6%. Stalingrad wasn't just a battle lost. It was an entire generation erased. The lesson? Numbers in history books hide oceans of personal tragedy. Behind every statistic is a human face. If stories like this grip you, stories where survival teeters on the edge of chance, then don't just watch and scroll. Hit subscribe now, because in our next deep dive, we'll explore another shocking twist in World War II history that most people have never heard of. Amid the staggering death toll, some men endured. Survival often hinged on small advantages, a stronger body, a trade skill the Soviets valued, or simply a place in a camp with slightly better rations. Some prisoners learned Russian and became interpreters. Others worked as mechanics, carpenters, or doctors, trades that kept them alive. Survivors later recalled how they formed survival circles, groups that pooled food and protected one another. The truth is harsh. Survival wasn't always about heroism. Sometimes it was about finding just enough usefulness to stay alive another day. For the survivors, release wasn't swift. Some prisoners returned to Germany in the late 1940s, but thousands more languished in Soviet labor camps well into the 1950s. Families back home received no news, only rumors and silence. Imagine a man returning in 1955, stepping into a home where his children had grown into adults. The war had ended 10 years earlier, but for these POWs, it was as if time had stopped. Their return was bittersweet, joy at survival, but pain for years stolen. Takeaway? Even survival carries scars that never fade. Back in Germany, wives and children waited for men who would never return. Many families received nothing, no letter, no official confirmation, just silence. Some clung to rumors that their loved ones were alive somewhere in the East. Others mourned without graves to visit. The uncertainty was its own kind of cruelty. A generation of children grew up fatherless, shaped by absence more than memory. War doesn't just destroy armies, it fractures families for decades. The lesson? Behind every fallen soldier lies a home that never truly heals. For years after the war, myths grew around the fate of the Stalingrad prisoners. Some believed far more had survived, hidden deep in Soviet labor camps. Others claimed secret deals brought men home in silence. But the truth was simpler and more brutal. Most had perished within months. Survivors often faced suspicion, accused of collaboration, simply because they lived. Memory twisted facts into comforting illusions. History demands clarity, not myth. The takeaway? Legends may soothe grief, but truth honors the real sacrifice. Myths fade. Human cost endures. Stalingrad was more than a city. It was a turning point. Before 1943, the German army seemed unstoppable. After Stalingrad, the myth of invincibility was shattered. Military planners worldwide studied the battle, realizing how logistics, weather, and morale can outweigh tanks and guns. The Soviets proved that patience, attrition, and encirclement could break even the most powerful foe. Future wars shifted focus. Supply lines became sacred, and urban warfare earned grim respect. The lesson? Battles aren't won by firepower alone. They're won by endurance, preparation, and the will to outlast. Power without strategy crumbles. But Stalingrad also forces us to ask, where does responsibility lie? Was Paulus right to surrender, sparing thousands from annihilation? Or was he complicit for following Hitler's suicidal orders until it was too late? Leaders gamble with lives, but it's the soldiers who pay the price. Morality in war is never black and white. It's a fog where survival and duty collide. The fate of the 91,000 reminds us, blind obedience can be deadly, but defiance carries its own risks. The takeaway? Leadership is measured not in loyalty, but in the lives preserved. Stalingrad isn't just history, it's a warning that echoes today. Modern armies still face the same dangers: overextension, fragile supply lines, and the arrogance of assuming victory is inevitable. In Afghanistan, Iraq, even Ukraine, leaders have learned that cities can become traps and morale can collapse faster than firepower. Technology changes, but soldiers remain human, vulnerable to hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Stalingrad whispers across decades: never underestimate resilience, and never gamble lives on hubris. The lesson? Forgetting Stalingrad means repeating it. History isn't distant. It's a mirror. The 91,000 who marched east didn't vanish into nothing. They became a symbol. For Germans, they embodied tragedy and futility. For Soviets, they marked a turning tide in the war. For the world, they stand as a reminder of war's merciless cost. Their legacy is not in victory or defeat, but in endurance against impossible odds. Each man was a story cut short, a voice silenced too soon. The final takeaway? Remembering them isn't about numbers. It's about never letting humanity vanish in statistics. Memory is survival's last battlefield. The fate of the 91,000 at Stalingrad is more than a footnote. It's a haunting reminder of what happens when ambition outruns humanity. These men weren't just soldiers. They were sons, fathers, brothers, caught in a machine bigger than themselves. Their story teaches us that war doesn't just end on the battlefield. It lingers in families, in nations, in memory. And if you thought this story was harrowing, wait until our next deep dive. We'll uncover another battlefield where fate was just as merciless and the lessons just as urgent. This content is for educational storytelling. It is not professional advice. Always consult a qualified expert as needed.